My name is Julian Reeve, and the invitation was a joke disguised as generosity. A pristine ivory envelope sat on my kitchen counter like it had every right to be there, unbothered by the dust of the years it took to arrive. Thick paper, gold lettering, a wax seal stamped with the Reeve family crest, like it didn't carry a message soaked in irony. I stared at it for a long time, standing in my kitchen with the midday light slanting through the blinds and cutting across the silence like it too wanted to ask, "Why now?" I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first, watched the pot fill, added 1 sugar, no cream. Routine had always been my defense. I sat down at the table, the envelope still untouched, like I needed caffeine to steady whatever might rise in my chest. I had a pretty good guess what it said, but guessing wasn't the same as facing it. And facing things, especially anything bearing my family's handwriting, came with its own kind of artillery. Finally, I slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the contents. A folded card of textured stock, the kind rich people used when they wanted to sound humble. In gold script, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Marcus Elijah Reeve and Major Talia and Wynn, to be held at the Reeve family estate, Charleston, South Carolina. Formal attire requested. RSVP by the 10th. No personal note. No scribbled, 'Hope to see you there.' Not even a printed, 'We look forward to celebrating with you.' Just cold formality wrapped in warmth they didn't mean. And that was my family in a sentence. Marcus, my younger brother. He used to follow me around with jelly on his fingers and a scowl on his face if I didn't let him win. He used to tug at my coat when I left for cadet school and call me Commander Jules. But time and silence did what it does. They turned childhood awe into adult contempt. The last words we exchanged had been at our father's funeral 5 years ago, when he'd looked at my dress blues like they embarrassed him. Said I shouldn't have worn them. Said this wasn't that kind of family. That funeral still lived inside me like smoke. I'd flown across 2 time zones to attend, and when I got there, my name wasn't on the program. My seat had been mysteriously forgotten, and I stood for half the service behind a pew like a stranger at someone else's grief. No one acknowledged my presence, not even my mother, Rosalind. My medals were too loud for the room. My posture too straight. They wanted someone quieter. Meek, maybe. Easier to rewrite. But I was never that man. Still, I wasn't angry. Not really. Anger was too personal. What I felt was colder than that. It was detachment built like armor, stitched together over years of being the wrong son in the wrong uniform. I should have tossed the invitation into the trash, poured coffee over it for good measure. I should have laughed, but I didn't. I reread it. Again and again. Something kept my hand from tearing it apart. Curiosity, maybe. Or some unspeakable gravity that only comes when a wound is touched just enough to make you curious about how deep it goes. But it wasn't just Marcus's name that gave me pause. It was hers. Talia Wynn. Major Talia Wynn. The last person I expected to see tethered to my family by anything other than distant memory. We served together overseas. Afghanistan. For deployments. She was steel-wrapped in dignity, one of the few commanding officers I ever respected without condition. She didn't play politics. She didn't shrink when the fire came. And she remembered names, not just ranks. She knew mine. She used it with weight when others just barked orders. I hadn't seen her since Kandahar. That mission was sealed under more red tape than I could recount, but the scars were permanent. The sand, the heat, the sound of my own breath when I dragged her through the smoke, those things never faded. We never spoke again after we came home. I figured that was intentional. Some soldiers write thank you notes. Others write silence. I learned to accept both. But now she was marrying my brother. I leaned back in the chair, the invitation resting in my open palm. My reflection in the kitchen window looked tired, older than my years. There were lines at the corners of my eyes that hadn't been there the last time I walked that Charleston driveway. I rubbed a hand over my jaw. My mother hated when I kept the beard. "Makes you look like someone who stopped trying," she once told me. As if I had ever been allowed to try my way. I tapped the edge of the card against the table. It was absurd, really, that they would invite me. That they would want me visible after all these years of burying my name behind Marcus's carefully curated resume and Rosalind's designer dresses. Maybe they thought the presence of a decorated veteran would add to the spectacle. Or maybe Talia sent the invitation herself. She would have known where to find me. The question wasn't whether I should go. The question was, why did I want to? Pride? Nostalgia? Revenge? Closure? None of those felt quite right. But something in my gut whispered, this matters. Whether to them or to me, I wasn't sure. But I knew what walking through that door would mean. I knew the looks I'd get, the whispers, the performative shock. "Oh, Julian, you made it." Like I hadn't been forgotten on purpose. But I also knew what I'd walk in with: my own story, my own silence, my own armor. I folded the invitation and slipped it back into the envelope. I wrote 2 words on the RSVP line: "I'll come." And I meant it. Not for them. Not even for Talia. For me. Because sometimes the only way to take your place at the table is to pull out your own chair and sit down like you've always belonged, whether they acknowledge you or not. I arrived at the Reeve family estate in Charleston 2 days before the wedding, driving down the magnolia-lined avenue in my civilian clothes, the suit I'd considered too formal for a celebration that never wanted me. The driveway curved past manicured hedges and past the wrought iron gates my father once designed, gates I had once inspected for security flaws, thinking to prove my worth. Now they stood as silent sentinels to everything I had lost. I parked by the porte cochere and stepped out into humidity that felt like an accusation. My uniform would have distinguished me in a crowd. This plain navy blazer and charcoal trousers only made me invisible. It was exactly what they asked: "Don't wear your uniform. It's not festive," my mother had said. I carried only a small duffel, 2 days' worth of clothes and a toothbrush, because I didn't plan to unpack more than I had years ago when I left home. My footprints were meant to be temporary, as if I could slip in, pay my respects, and slip back out before the family could remember why I mattered in the first place. I rang the doorbell and waited, listening to the echo of my own heart in the foyer. The door opened, and there she stood, Rosalind Reeve, elegant, composed, the same way she always was on the outside. Pearls, tailored suit, the exact shade of lipstick that said she was in control. But her eyes flicked over me as though she were scanning for defects. She said nothing, just stepped aside and gestured to the foyer, her posture a barricade between welcome and warning. "Julian," she said finally, the name a question. "You made it." Her tone contained no warmth, only expectation. "Behave yourself." I nodded and let her guide me through hallways adorned with family portraits, my younger self in dress blues, my father with that proud half-smile, Marcus in his cap and gown. Each image seemed to glare at me for falling short of heir apparent. I thought back to funerals, promotions, graduations I'd missed, always because duty called me somewhere they couldn't follow. And here they were, picturing me as a visitor to their version of home. In the library, Marcus awaited me. He was tall, prone to nervous energy, pacing between shelves as if the weight of his big day was enough to knock him off balance. He glanced at me, glanced away. His tie was half loosened, uneven stripes of navy and burgundy, and his hands trembled despite the promise of celebration. He reached out and offered a handshake, firm but brief, as though I might pull rank or offer a discount on some imagined debt. Then he leaned in, voice low. "Just behave, all right," he said, each word clipped. "Don't give them a reason to gossip." I lifted an eyebrow. "Behave?" I echoed. "Like I care what they think." He swallowed, avoiding my gaze. "You know how they are. So does everyone else," I said. "Including you." He looked down at the Persian rug underfoot, tracing the pattern with solitude in his eyes. "I'm not them," he said after a moment. "I don't think like they do." That admission startled me more than a punch to the gut. If Marcus felt constrained by our family's expectations, then that meant the invitation had hinged on a promise more fragile than I believed. But I kept it to myself. "Then act like it," I said. "Don't make me regret coming." He closed his eyes, as though bracing himself. "I'm sorry, Jules," he said softly. The name sounded strange in the regulated hush of the estate. He swallowed again and turned away. "I need to check on seating." I watched him go, anxiety animating each stride. Behind him, my mother lingered by a grandfather clock, arms folded. The clock's pendulum swung back and forth, the same rhythmic warning I'd heard since childhood. Present yourself when the time is right, or risk being forgotten altogether. I took a slow breath. I wasn't here to start trouble, but I also wasn't here to disappear. This was my family, no matter how sharply they cut me out of it. And I carried stories in my silence that they had chosen not to know. Stories of classified missions where every step could be our last. Stories of blankets of night turning into bursts of gunfire. Stories of comrades lost and saved. Stories they dismissed as irrelevant to who I was when I left Charleston 5 years ago. A servant appeared with a tray of iced tea, sweet, southern strength, and a single cucumber slice floating idly on the surface. She placed it before me and offered a bow so slight it bordered on imperceptible. I nodded. She retreated. I raised the glass to my lips and tasted home, unreal and strained. The hush of the hallway seemed to swallow every sound but the steady circle of air through my lungs. And here I thought I'd escaped the family drama. I murmured to myself. A voice answered behind me, soft, controlled. You never really do. I turned to find Talia when standing in the archway, her dress blues tailored so precisely that they looked sculpted. The metals on her chest gleamed like shards of daylight. Her hair was pinned back in the style that once made me forget to breathe, and her presence filled the corridor with authority. She offered me a slight nod, respectful but unreadable. No smile, no warmth, only recognition. Major, I said, voice rougher than I intended. She inclined her head. Sergeant Reeve, she corrected me gently. Technically still. I let a ghost of a smile pass. Old habits. She stepped closer, but not too close. You look good, she said, eyes flicking to my civilian attire. I'm glad you came. The words landed like an offer. I wanted to reach out, to ask why she believed I should be here when my own mother didn't. But I swallowed it. Instead, I said, thanks for inviting me. Her lips curved. Your brother and mother needed reminding. She glanced back toward the library. The others will follow your lead. I studied her face, strong jaw, steady gaze, a hint of warmth behind the professional mask. Or they'll sit in their chairs and pretend I'm not here. Not this time, she said. They won't ignore this chapter of your life. Not when they see what you did for me. My heart stuttered at the reminder of Kandahar, of how she once stood between life and death, and how I carried her out of the flames. I nodded. Then let's hope they listen. She gave me one last nod and turned away. I was left in the corridor, alone again, but no longer invisible. The invitation had been a joke. Yes, an ironic jibe from a family who once refused to see me. But now that I'd crossed their threshold, the joke was on them. I pressed my shoulder against the wall like a man leaning into the storm, and I walked forward, ready for the welcome that wasn't, and the reckoning that would follow. After dessert, the tent hummed with contented chatter as servers cleared plates of lemon tart and replaced them with crystal flutes of champagne. Lanterns cast a soft glow over white linen tables, and the humid Charleston night settled around us like a velvet cloak. Conversation drifted from childhood memories to wedding day logistics. Who would catch the bouquet? Whether the florist had delivered the correct shade of blush peonies, whose cousin was flying in from Europe. I sipped my sparkling water and watched my family relax into their roles, their laughter light and practiced, their smiles trained to appear genuine. I sat back, ready to savor the fleeting calm before the formal toasts, the final chance for peace before words drew battle lines. Then Marcus rose, unsteady on his feet, one hand gripping the back of his chair while the other tried to steady the champagne flute. He cleared his throat, a sloppy rasp that carried across the hushed tent. The chatter died instantly. An audience trained to obey the cue that it was time for attention. Marcus's cheeks were flushed, his tie askew, but he carried himself as though this moment belonged to him and only him. He raised the flute high, tinting the lantern light golden. His eyes flicked to his new bride, Talia, and softened with affection. Then he turned toward the broader circle of family and friends, toward me. And to think, he began, voice unsteady, that my brother Julian here once guarded base gates. His slurred emphasis hung on the word once, as though that chapter of my life had expired and deserved to be forgotten. He paused for effect, misjudging the weight of his statement. Who would want a guy like that? He let out a laugh that trembled on the edge of vulnerability. At that moment, laughter rippled through the tent, delayed, appraising, but genuine in its cruelty. The sound felt like shards of glass striking my chest, each chuckle an accusation that I did not belong. I did not move. My lips remained still, but inside, a storm raged. Indignation, hurt, fury. I remembered the map coordinates taped above my bunk in Kandahar, the hours I'd spent fortifying gates against insurgent threats, the lives I'd protected, my own included, behind those same steel barriers. But none of that mattered here. In this place, my uniform was a punchline. As the laughter subsided, my mother spoke. Rosalind Reeve, always poised, always composed, her silk dress perfect, her pearls immaculate, her posture unassailable. She cleared her throat with the air of someone announcing a government decree. He's the shame of this family, she intoned, voice soft but sharpened at the edges. But we let him come, because we're gracious. The words landed like a gauntlet thrown at my feet, emblazoned in scorn. The tent fell into a brittle hush. Flames from the torches outside flickered against the tent wall, casting her profile in sharp relief. I saw my mother not as the matriarch I once idolized, but as an adversary who had spent years rewriting history to excise anything that complicated her narrative. Her grace was a weapon, her generosity a brandishing of power. I decide who is welcome. The guests shifted, glancing at one another, uncertain whether the joke had been delivered or the execution orders given. Marcus swayed on his feet, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. His eyes found mine, apologetic and confused. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to salvage something, but no words came. All along the table, forks clattered into plates, and a server hastily collected abandoned champagne flutes. The orchestrated merriment stalled as though the entire evening held its breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to break the brittle silence. I sat motionless, the first flush of heat rising to my collar. Time slowed. Every face in the tent was an accusation, a witness to my family's verdict. I could taste the tang of salt on my tongue, tears threatening in the corners of my eyes, and I forced them back. I did not want their pity. I did not want their hollow apologies or their suffocating sympathy. I wanted them to feel the weight of their words. I wanted them to notice me, not as the awkward outcast, but as the man they had so casually dismissed. In that charged stillness, I felt something shift deep within me. The version of Julian who had long ago retreated behind silence trembled on the edge of retreat again. But a new resolve settled over me, firmer than any armor I'd worn in combat. I would not shrink. I would not apologize for existing here. I would not let them rewrite my story with jokes. I opened my mouth, the words forming before I could second-guess them. Then I paused, feeling the full force of every gaze locked on me, waiting to see whether I would crumble or stand my ground. I tasted blood in my mouth. My heart pounding so loud it drowned out the distant chirp of cicadas and the rustle of magnolia leaves outside. But the words would have to wait, because there was one more voice that demanded the floor before I could claim mine, one more person whose intervention would tilt the scales irreversibly. And as Marcus teetered and my mother's pearl necklace caught the lantern light like falling stars, I realized the next moment would define everything. They expected silence. What came next? No one expected. Talia rose with the quiet authority of a commander entering a war room. She placed her champagne flute on the polished mahogany table with such deliberate precision that the light caught the rim in a single brilliant arc. The murmur of conversation stuttered to a halt as heads turned, some in curiosity, most in thinly veiled anticipation of the next punchline. They expected her to laugh along, to settle back into their choreography of polite disdain. Instead, she held their gaze with unwavering resolve. The tent's canopy fluttered above, and for a heartbeat, the world contracted to the space between her and me. Her eyes locked onto mine first, steel blue pools that carried memories I thought buried in Kandahar's dust. In that look, she said, "I remember. I honor you." Then she pivoted, addressing the assembled guests with a voice that cut through the thick, humid air like a blade. "Actually," she began, enunciating the single word with the precision of a drill sergeant, "Julian Reeve isn't just a gate guard." In her uniform, she seemed to grow taller, the medals on her chest gleaming like testimony. The word rippled through the tent, silencing every whisper, every chatter of forks against plates. She paused, allowing the gravity of her opening to settle in. "This man," she continued, gesturing toward me with her free hand, "is the same officer who led the classified recovery mission in Kandahar that saved 12 lives." Her tone carried the weight of every life lost and saved, the gravity of every secret debriefing. I felt a swell of emotion, pride, relief, gratitude, to hear my service acknowledged so publicly, so unapologetically. A collective gasp rose from the guests. Some faces paled, others contorted in disbelief. Her statement was a detonator, and the laughter that had cut through me moments before was replaced by stunned silence. The only sound was the soft rustle of linen and the faint drone of cicadas outside, as though nature. "She arrived at our forward operating base with a bullet wound to the shoulder," Talia said, voice steady. "Her unit was pinned down inside the compound after an IED strike. Communications were down. Extraction seemed impossible. But Sergeant Reeve," she emphasized my rank, reclaiming it for me, organized a breach under fire. "He personally shielded me as we moved through the courtyard, and he carried my weight when my legs went numb from blood loss." Her words painted scenes I had not shared with any of them. The acrid smell of cordite, the staccato burst of gunfire, the weight of Talia's body pressed against me as I hauled her to safety. Each detail pressed against the guests' consciences like evidence they could no longer dismiss. My chest tightened as I remembered that day, my uniform caked in dust and sweat, my heart pounding in my ears as the seconds stretched into eternity. When she said, "He took a bullet for me," the murmur of shock rippled through the crowd again, louder this time, resonant. Attuned to every syllable, I felt the tide turn. The power in her declaration was undeniable. I glanced at Marcus, whose glass shook in his hand. His eyes, once mocking, were now wide with guilt and awe. My mother's perfect composure shattered. Her lips parted as though she had just exhaled a decade's worth of restrained emotion. Talia looked out over the crowd, gaze steady and fearless. "There wouldn't be a wedding," she said softly, "if not for him." It wasn't a question. It was a fact laid bare in front of everyone who had ever doubted me. I felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through my chest, a mixture of vindication and relief. I had never sought recognition. I had only done my duty. Yet here, at a dinner where I'd been reduced to a punchline, I found myself center stage in a truth too potent to ignore. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, small claps fluttering like startled birds. Then it grew, crescendoing into a wave that swept around the tent. Forks and knives sounded against plates as guests rose to their feet, some wiping tears from their eyes, others casting sorrowful glances at Marcus or my mother. Talia's words had pierced the armor of indifference that had shielded them for years. I remained seated, chest heaving with the force of my emotions. I felt Talia's glance on me again, pride etched in the steady set of her jaw. I wanted to rise, to embrace her, to thank her with words, but they caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of everything we'd endured together. The sound of my mother's quiet sob drifted through the hum of applause, a final fracture in the facade she'd maintained for so long. As the guests settled back into their seats, the master of ceremonies struggled to regain control, offering a shaky toast to the honored services of the Reeve family, now inclusive of one Julian Reeve. But the formality felt hollow after Talia's declaration. The evening had shifted. The power dynamic had flipped. I was no longer the invisible brother at table 14. I was their hero, their protector, their family. I raised my glass, this time with champagne, looking directly at Talia, who held my gaze with unwavering confidence. My toast was silent but potent, a promise that I would carry this moment forward, that I would never again hide in the shadows of their expectations. When their eyes met mine, I saw acceptance and regret, respect and newfound admiration shining in the soft lamplight. The final notes of Talia's revelation lingered like embers glowing in the dark. The family's laughter never returned that evening, but a deeper warmth took its place, one forged in truth rather than pretense. And as I sipped the champagne, I realized that respect didn't need grand ceremonies. It only needed to stand in the open, unafraid of the light. Silence settled over the estate like a dense fog after Talia's declaration, thicker and more pregnant than any laughter or whispers that came before. I remained seated as the guests processed what they'd just heard, the moment stretching interminably. I could almost feel the shifting weight of their eyes, each gaze heavy with recognition and shame. The hum of cicadas outside grew louder, as though nature itself murmured in astonishment. My uniform pressed against my chest felt both foreign and familiar, the symbol of a life they had refused to acknowledge until now. My mother was the first to move. Rosalind Reeve rose from her seat with regal composure, though her usual poise trembled at the edges. She glided toward the head table, pearls clicking against her silk dress, and stopped before Talia. For the first time since I'd arrived, our eyes met. I saw something in her gaze I'd never witnessed before, vulnerability. A crack in the armor of disdain she'd donned for years. She inclined her head, an acknowledgement of truth she could no longer deny. I felt triumph flicker in my chest, mingled with pity. She had built her identity on suppressing mine. Now she had to reconcile with the man she had long dismissed as insignificant. The guests remained seated, transfixed, as Talia resumed her place beside Marcus. He, pale and shaken, gave me a tight nod, an apology and a plea wrapped in one gesture. My heart softened for him, the brother who had once envied my name, and now looked to me for forgiveness. But first, I had to re-establish my ground. I took a slow breath, tasting the night air, scented with magnolia, and shifted expectations. I stood, the fabric of my blazer settling into place, and cleared my throat. Silence enveloped me, and I felt the fragile tension in the tent buckle under my own stillness. This was my moment to speak my truth. I want to thank Major Wynn for her words. I began, voice steady though my ribs tightened with emotion. My family has known her strength and valor for years. I only wish they had known mine before tonight. A ripple of startled laughter trembled through the room, but it was nervous laughter, devoid of mockery. I never asked for recognition, I continued, scanning the sea of faces. I served because it was my duty. I guarded gates, cleared paths, and built defenses not for medals or praise, but to protect lives that mattered. I paused, allowing the words to settle like stones, then looked directly at my mother. You called me the shame of this family, Mother. You said you brought me here out of grace. I accepted that grace, though it cut deeper than any insult. My voice softened. I never wanted to be a burden. I only wanted to be a son. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, pearls of regret she could not disguise. Her stillness spoke volumes. I turned to Marcus, whose shoulders hunched with guilt and relief. Marcus, I said, voice gentle but firm, you said you were jealous of the death of a uniform you never understood. I left because this family closed its doors, not because I wanted to abandon my home. I stepped closer to him, closing the physical gap that had felt vast for years. You don't have to compete with my reputation. You just have to be yourself. His eyes glistened in the lantern light as he nodded, the weight of brotherhood returning to his posture. I lifted my gaze to the wider circle of guests. I wasn't invisible. I was alone. I never sought pity, but I needed understanding. My fingers brushed the glass of champagne at my side. Respect isn't given. It's earned by actions, by integrity, by standing when others fall. Tonight, you've seen me stand. I ask only that you remember this moment, not as the night you laughed, but the night you listened. A hush deeper than before settled across the tent. Chairs creaked as guests shifted, aligning themselves not with their previous prejudices, but with a new truth that demanded acknowledgement. Talia reached out and placed a steady hand on my shoulder, her touch a silent anchor. I offered her a nod of gratitude, acknowledging the ally who had refused to let my story remain untold. The warmth of her presence buoyed me, as if we were anchored in a storm that suddenly found calm. I felt strength in that gesture, a promise of solidarity amid the fractured bonds of blood. Slowly, the first tentative claps began, soft, deliberate, almost reverent. One by one, hands met hands until the tent resonated with genuine applause. The celebration that had once excluded me now embraced my voice. I sensed a shift so profound that every face in the gathering reflected it, surprise giving way to admiration, disdain melting into shame, indifference blossoming into respect. I lowered my gaze, letting the moment wash over me like a tide reclaiming its shore. When the applause waned, the estate's orchestra, gently hidden behind white drapes, began to play once more, a melody of strings beckoning us back to celebration. But this time, the music held a different promise. It was no longer the soundtrack of hollow family tradition. It was an anthem of renewal, of recognition, of truth prevailing over pretense. I lifted my glass again, this time to no one in particular, simply to the night that had reshaped everything. As I sipped the champagne, I could feel the tense atmosphere warm around me, as though acceptance radiated in every human heart present. The cicadas' drones softened to background hum, and the lantern's light glimmered with possibility. My mother stood and approached me, her expression unguarded. She clasped my hand and whispered back, "I'm proud of you." No qualifiers, no apologies, just homage to the son she had once banished. I nodded, the tension in my chest easing into relief. In that moment, I realized that respect didn't shout or demand. It simply stood unafraid under the light of truth. And tonight, I had stood, and everyone had listened. Later that night, the estate's grand foyer felt cavernous, and still as I waited near the marble pillars, the echo of my footsteps muted by the thick oriental rugs. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, but their light cast long, expectant shadows across the walls, as though the house itself held its breath. I knew she would come, the woman who had raised me and taught me decorum, and who moments ago had finally shown me her heart. But I didn't know what would happen when she did. When my mother emerged from the corridor leading to the bedrooms, her silk gown shimmering in the lamplight. Her posture betrayed a tremor of uncertainty. She stopped a pace away, arms hanging at her sides, pearls swaying with her slight swaying gait. I studied her face. The flawless makeup, the carefully arranged hair, and the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. She looked every inch the matriarch, but she wore vulnerability tonight like a second skin. "Julian," she said, voice hushed yet heavy with more meaning than any public proclamation. "You embarrassed us." Her words landed with the weight of a formal reprimand, but they sounded small here, in this hushed alcove, stripped of ceremony. I inhaled slowly, the tension knotted in my chest loosening just enough for me to speak. "No," I said, calm but firm. "You embarrassed yourself." Her eyes flicked away, as though she hadn't expected the words, or their steadiness, from me. The polished marble underfoot felt cold through my shoes, grounding me in the moment. "Everything we did," she began, "we did to protect your future. We tried to shield you from everyone, including ourselves." I let her words settle, breathing through the old ache of being the family's inconvenient truth. "Protect me," I repeated softly. "By pretending I didn't serve? By erasing my sacrifices? By making me small?" Her lips quivered. For a moment, her composure cracked, revealing the depth of her regret. She stepped closer, hesitated, then swallowed hard. "We thought if we pretended you weren't there, they would forget your mistakes." The word mistakes hung in the air, a lie she finally couldn't sustain. "We thought we were sparing you." I shook my head slowly, the motion gentle but resolute. "You weren't sparing me," I said. "You were erasing me." My voice softened as I took a tentative step forward. I didn't need protection. I needed acceptance. Her breath hitched, and she closed the distance between us, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch my arm. The pearls at her wrist rattled softly, an adult's attempt at comfort, but an echo of the child I once was. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I thought I was doing what was best. I searched her eyes for the woman I remembered. Warm, proud, unbending in her love yet fierce in her defense. Her betrayal cut deeper than any enemy's bullet, but beneath it lay a mother's fear of losing me, fear of a son transformed by war, fear of a story she no longer recognized. I placed my hand over hers, feeling her pulse quicken beneath the silk. "Mother," I said, voice gentle, "I survived because I believed in something greater than belonging. I survived because I believed in duty and honor. Now I stand here because I believe in family." Her tears slipped free, glistening on her cheeks before pooling at her chin. She brushed them away with a trembling hand. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of years hung in the space between us, but something lighter now, understanding, slipped into the silence. Finally, she drew in a shaky breath and nodded. "Then let me learn that," she said. "Teach me how to be your mother again." I felt a swell of compassion so strong it nearly unseated me. The gulf we'd crossed tonight, the gulf of unspoken truths and unacknowledged sacrifices, had finally bridged. I stepped around her and offered my arm, the invitation to walk together into a new chapter neither of us could have written alone. We moved down the corridor side by side, our footsteps sounding in harmonic rhythm, the grand doors of the foyer closing gently behind us. Beyond them, the celebration continued, laughter, music, and the murmur of toasts made and redeemed. But we were beyond the tense reach now, in a private space where apologies mattered more than applause. As we walked toward the hall leading to the guest rooms, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act but a journey, one requiring both tears and trust. My mother's hand trembled on my arm, but her grip held true. In that moment, I knew the lessons of home could be rewritten. We would relearn how to honor each other, not through invitation cards or guest lists, but through the daily acts of acknowledgement and truth. In the hush of the estate's inner sanctum, we found our way back to each other. The silence that had once cut deeper than any insult now unfolded into a quiet understanding that would heal us both. And for the first time in 5 years, I believed that family could be more than a title. It could be a promise renewed in the open light of honesty, respect, and love. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, the estate was quiet except for the distant hum of gardeners tending to hedges and the muted voices of caterers setting up for the main event. I lingered in the breakfast room, the sunlight filtering through stained glass windows and bathing the table in shards of color. Marcus arrived a moment later, his tie loosened and his expression unsteady, as though the weight of last night's revelations had taken residence in his shoulders. He carried 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for me, and placed mine gently before me without meeting my eyes. The steam curled upward, carrying the rich aroma of morning's promise. I savored that scent, remembering thousands of dawns in distant deserts and mountain passes where coffee had meant survival, and here it meant something softer: reconciliation. He stood by the window, watching sparrows flit among the magnolia blossoms. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I took a sip of the coffee, strong, black, and waited. Finally, he turned, his hands clutching the cup as though it were a lifeline. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice raw. "Last night, I didn't know how to stand by you." His gaze dropped to the cup, as though ashamed to meet my eyes. "I was jealous. I thought I'd never step out of your shadow, so I tried to make you smaller." He paused, swallowing hard. "I never meant to hurt you like that." I set my cup down and studied him. The boy who once chased me around the yard with a stick was gone, replaced by a man who trembled under the strain of his own remorse. "You never asked," I replied gently. "You never asked what I'd been through, or why I left, or what I carried home with me." His breath caught. "I assumed you left because you wanted out, because you didn't care about us. But you were carrying our name into danger every time you suited up." I leaned forward. "I was fighting for everyone I loved, even if none of you understood it." He ran a hand through his hair, the tension in his jaw easing as he absorbed my words. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought bringing Talia into the family would heal everything: my insecurity, our family's pride, my fear of being forgotten. But I see now that there's no substitute for the truth." He looked up, eyes glistening. "I want to be enough, Jules. Not to prove something, but to stand beside you." A rush of relief warmed my chest. He had finally spoken the words I'd longed to hear, not as a competitor, but as a brother seeking camaraderie. I rose and placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid weight of him. "You are enough," I said. "You always have been. You just never believed it." He exhaled, as if a storm had passed, and nodded. We sat together in companionable silence, listening to the distant clatter of silverware and polite conversation drifting through the open windows. Outside, the magnolia petals drifted like confetti in the breeze, reminding me that beauty and mess often mingled. I poured him a refill of coffee and pushed the cup toward him. "Today is your wedding," I told him. "Your day. Let me be your brother, not your shame or your shadow." He offered a shaky smile and clinked his cup against mine. "To family," he said, and drank. I drained my own and set the cup aside. "To family," I echoed. Later, as the wedding ceremony approached, I found my mother in the drawing room, selecting a corsage from a silver tray. The firelight danced across her tear-bright eyes. She glanced at me, hesitated, then placed the delicate blooms in my hand. "For you," she said, "to wear today." I felt the fragile bloom brush my palm and realized how far we'd come from last night's confrontation. "Thank you," I replied softly. "It means more than you know." Her lips quivered as she turned away, but her shoulders squared with resolve. I knew that she was embracing her role again, a mother who saw her son, not the uniform or the shame. The air shimmered with anticipation as I walked toward the gardens, corsage pinned to my lapel. I could hear the soft murmur of guests gathering on the lawn, the distant chord of a string quartet tuning. The path wound between azalea shrubs and fountains, each step a heartbeat closer to the moment when I would stand beside Marcus and Talia. Brother to groom, soldier to bride's hero, Julian Reeve without apology or excuse. As I emerged onto the lawn, the sun glinting off Talia's dress blues and Marcus's tuxedo, the congregation fell quiet. A hush of expectation settled like dew, and for the first time, the full circle of my family and friends looked to me not with hesitation, but with open hearts. I took my place beside my brother, feeling the strength of his arm briefly graze mine. He nodded, a steady anchor in the whirlwind of ceremony. When Talia approached down the aisle, her gaze found mine, serene and resolute. In her eyes I saw the memory of our shared battles, the unspoken vow of loyalty, and the promise of. As the organ swelled, I inhaled deeply, tasting magnolia on the breeze and the weight of family reclaimed. The moment to speak had passed, but the moment to stand steadfast, whole, and recognized was here. Today, they would witness not a gate guard or a shame, but a brother, a soldier, and a man who had earned his place. And as Talia reached my side, offering her arm, I knew that our shared history had forged a bond unbreakable by time or silence. In that gentle embrace, I felt every step back to home complete itself, and family become truth. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with a gentle breeze stirring the magnolia branches that framed the white chairs arranged on the lawn. I stood at the back of the assembly, hands clasped behind my back, watching as guests filed in, neighbors in seersucker suits, cousins in pastel dresses, old family friends whose laughter had once excluded me now arriving with curious glances. The string quartet tuned their instruments beneath the oak canopy, violins and cellos murmuring in harmony, and I felt the familiar steadiness of anticipation thrumming in my veins, much like before a mission briefing. But this time, there was no danger of bullets, only the possibility of acceptance and reconciliation. My mother, Rosalind, appeared beside me, resplendent in a dove-gray gown, her eyes soft and observant. She offered a small smile that reached her eyes, and for the first time I saw genuine warmth there, rather than the practiced polish I'd grown accustomed to. She nodded toward the path where Talia would enter. She asked me to walk her down, she whispered. I hope you understand. I inclined my head, pride lacing through me at the unity forming between my mother and Talia, an alliance I'd thought impossible just days ago. Of course, I replied softly. She deserves every support. As she drifted away, I squared my shoulders and turned my attention to the procession. The groom's mother ushered Marcus down the aisle, placing his hand on the small of her back. He looked every inch the handsome groom, nervous smile, hair perfectly combed, tuxedo crisp. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and he gave me a small nod that spoke volumes. Gratitude, solidarity, the promise that we had weathered the storm together. Then he faced forward, and the hush deepened as all attention shifted to the entrance. Talia appeared at the far end of the aisle, framed by the morning light. She walked with calm purpose, her dress blues tailored to perfection, white gloves clasped in front of her, the insignia on her shoulder marking her service and her strength. But it was her gaze, steady and direct, that held the power. She scanned the guests, pausing on my mother, then Marcus, then pausing on me. In that fleeting moment, the world narrowed to the space between us. The embroidered patch on her sleeve caught the sun, and I thought I saw a glint of tears at the corners of her eyes. She paused beside my mother, who held her arm with pride and acceptance, and then they moved in tandem down the aisle. I stepped forward to receive Talia when she reached us. Her hand brushed mine, a touch that conveyed more tenderness than any words could. I offered a small bow, the gesture respectful and intimate. Major, I said softly, though the rank felt unnecessary in this moment. She inclined her head, returning the bow. Sergeant, she replied, voice steadier than mine. Thank you for everything. The guests watched, some leaning forward as though witnessing a private exchange made public, but no one dared interrupt the solemnity. We took our places, Talia to Marcus's left, me to his right, forming the bridal party with the grace of soldiers on parade. As the ceremony began, I studied the faces of the guests, their expressions transformed by Talia's presence. Some wore awe, others regret, many wearing smiles that had taken days to find their way here. I thought of the jokes whispered about Table 14, of the whispered shame that surrounded me, and marveled at how swiftly truths could realign perceptions once they were spoken aloud. The officiant's words rolled out in measured cadence, but my mind drifted to the words Talia had spoken days before, her declaration of my service, their echo resonating in my heart with renewed strength. When it came time for vows, I watched Marcus speak, voice trembling with emotion, but it was Talia's vows that spoke most clearly to me. She turned to Marcus and declared her love, her admiration, her unwavering commitment, then paused and addressed all assembled. Before I become Mrs. Reeve, she said, her gaze sweeping the congregation, I must acknowledge someone who saved everything for me, Julian Reeve. Her voice held that same clarity, that same unwavering conviction that had dismantled barriers. Julian, you saved my life when it was on the line. You stood guard when no one else could. You carried me through darkness and refused to let me fall. She paused, letting the hush deepen. You're not just family by marriage. You're family by choice. Thank you for everything you gave so that we could stand here today. A hush profound enveloped the lawn, broken only by the soft rustle of wine through the magnolia leaves. Marcus reached out and took Talia's hand, squeezing it gently, gratitude shining in his eyes. Guests turned to me, many blinking back tears, some nodding with solemn respect. My chest tightened, emotion swelled, equal parts humility and pride. In that sacred moment, I felt every footprint I had left behind, the dusty roads of deployments, the silence of years away, the weight of doubts dissolved by truth. I felt welcomed home. When the officiant spoke the final words and pronounced the couple married, The crowd erupted in applause that echoed across the gardens. Flowers tossed into the air, cheers ringing out, and Talia and Marcus shared their first kiss as husband and wife, their faces bright with joy. I stepped forward, offering my hand to Talia in congratulation, then to Marcus, our clasped firm and brotherly. Guests streamed past us, each offering smiles, handshakes, hugs, gestures I accepted with a steady grace that surprised even me. Later, at the reception, I found myself surrounded by people who once pretended I didn't exist. I shared laughs that felt genuine, recounted anecdotes that carried the weight of new respect, and watched my family circle grow in understanding. My mother introduced me to relatives as the man who once guarded our gates and saved our family's honor. Marcus toasted me at the head table, his words heartfelt and knowing, while Talia leaned into me at my side, her presence a constant reminder of the bond we shared. As the sun dipped low and lanterns illuminated the lawns, I slipped away to the garden's edge, where the magnolia petals drifted like blessings from above. I stared at the sky, thinking of the journey that had brought me here, the battles fought, the truths hidden, the courage to return. And when a hand slipped into mine, I turned to see my mother smiling, eyes bright with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, voice full of genuine pride. I nodded, tears stinging my own eyes. "Thank you for bringing me home," I said. She leaned in, pressing her forehead to mine. "You never left," she murmured. "You just had to show us where home truly is." In that embrace, beneath the magnolia's gaze, I knew respect didn't shout. It whispered in moments of honesty, of courage, of family choosing truth over pretense. And when it did, people listened. Weeks passed after the wedding, and the world seemed to catch its breath before demanding its next spectacle. I returned to my apartment in the city, a place I had furnished with practicality rather than sentiment, carrying a stack of unopened mail and a lingering sense of momentum that even my morning coffee couldn't quell. One afternoon, as I sorted through envelopes, a headline on my laptop caught my eye: "Major honors brother-in-law in viral speech." I clicked through to a video clip of Talia's toast at the rehearsal dinner, her unwavering gaze and steady voice slicing through the pretension of that event, exposing truth like a blade cutting through false facade. The footage had been shared by one of the guests, captioned simply, "When respect stands up, everyone listens." Within days, it racked up millions of views, comments praising my service, messages of gratitude from veterans who felt seen, and queries from journalists and recruiters alike. I watched it once, then again, feeling both humbled and unsettled by the attention. I had never sought recognition, yet here it was, thrust upon me by someone whose respect meant more than any medal. Recruiters from private security firms, government agencies, and think tanks began to call. Their voices were polished, their questions probing. Could I speak at conferences? Would I consider consulting on base security? One call came from a documentary producer named Andrea Miles, whose voice trembled with excitement as she described her project, a feature-length film on unsung heroes, the people who stood guard so the world could sleep. She said she wanted to tell my story, from the firefights in Kandahar to the silence at my own father's funeral. I listened and felt a familiar surge of reluctance. My life in uniform was supposed to be private business, classified, compartmentalized, dismissed. But I also recognized an opportunity to leverage this moment for something greater than personal notoriety. When I finally agreed to meet Andrea for coffee, I clarified that this would not be about me, but about the people like me, soldiers and veterans who returned home to find their sacrifices invisible. She nodded, eyes bright, and said, "Then it's settled. We'll make it your mission." That conversation planted a seed that grew over the next few days into an idea I couldn't shake. I drafted a proposal for the Guardian Initiative, a nonprofit program designed to provide security training, mentorship, and reintegration support for overlooked military personnel leaving active duty. The core concept was simple: bring together veterans with specialized skills, tactical engineers, medics, intel analysts, and pair them with community organizations, small businesses, and local governments that needed security expertise. Beyond training, we would offer counseling, resume workshops, and peer support to help veterans translate battlefield experiences into civilian success. I emailed the proposal to Talia first, knowing her endorsement would carry weight. She replied within the hour, "This is exactly what the world needs. I'm in." Encouraged, I forwarded it to my brother Marcus, who responded with enthusiasm and a promise to connect me with his corporate contacts. Even my mother, once skeptical of my motives, called to say she wanted to volunteer in any capacity, proud to support what she now recognized as my calling. Within a month, we secured seed funding from a philanthropic foundation impressed by the viral video's reach and the grassroots support it generated. Talia hosted a gala at her base's officers' club, a modest affair by military standards but grand in the promise it represented. I stood at the podium in plain clothes, no uniform, no medals, because the Guardian Initiative was bigger than my story. The room fell silent as I explained our mission. To restore dignity to those who had guarded gates and defused bombs, to translate courage into community resilience, and to ensure that no veteran felt erased after serving. After my speech, I fielded questions from attendees. How would the training modules be structured? What measures would we take to protect participants' mental health? How could corporations integrate veterans into leadership roles? Each question reflected a genuine desire to act, not just observe. By the end of the evening, we had commitments for partnerships with 3 local nonprofits, a county emergency management office, and a technical college willing to host training sessions on their range. As I shook hands with guests, I realized I had stepped from the margins of my family's narrative into a place where my purpose resonated. The Guardian Initiative launched its first pilot program 6 weeks later in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The space smelled of fresh paint and promise, with training mats rolling out on the concrete floor and training rounds set up on modular steel frames. 20 veterans, former gate guards, combat medics, drone operators, filed in, some with tremors visible in their hands, others with expressions of guarded hope. Talia delivered the opening remarks, her uniform crisp, every bit the leader I had known in Afghanistan. She emphasized that their skills were not relics of war but tools for rebuilding communities. Then I spoke, detailing the week's agenda, tactical communication drills, de-escalation techniques for civilian contexts, technical workshops on cybersecurity fundamentals. Afterward, I watched as they paired off, veterans with diverse backgrounds teaching each other, a bomb tech veteran demonstrating improvised explosive device recognition to a software engineer turned drone pilot turned cybersecurity instructor. Laughter and focused energy filled the room, the kind of camaraderie forged only in extreme circumstances. I felt a swell of pride that went deeper than any medal, pride in seeing their skills valued, their stories honored. Word of the program spread quickly. A local newspaper ran a feature on the Guardian Initiative's bold approach to veteran reintegration, and a regional business journal interviewed me about the economic benefits of hiring veterans. A prominent think tank invited me to speak at an online forum on post-conflict transitions, and the documentary team led by Andrea Miles filmed our training sessions, veterans sharing their journeys on camera with raw honesty. Sometimes I watched the footage and flinched at my own vulnerability, the ways my hands shook when recounting combat, the distant look in my eyes as I described carrying wounded comrades under fire. But I also felt the healing in speaking aloud the truths I had long carried in silence. Each interview, each article, each shared video clip chipped away at the isolation I had once accepted as inevitable. A month after the pilot, a young cadet in civilian clothes approached me at an airport gate where I was waiting for a flight to a speaking engagement. He stood at attention, hand lifted in a tentative salute. "Sergeant Reeve," he asked, voice earnest and unsteady. "I watched that clip of Major Wynn's speech. I applied to the Guardian Initiative because of you." His eyes glistened. "You changed everything." My heart tightened. In that moment, I saw a reflection of my younger self, eager, uncertain, desperate for affirmation that my service meant something. I returned his salute, my hand firm on his shoulder. "Welcome aboard," I said, and meant it more than any words I had spoken. He smiled, relief and excitement colliding in that grin, and we spoke for a few minutes about the program's next phase. As I boarded the plane, I thought of the curveball life had thrown when I first received that wedding invitation. I had gone expecting irony and perhaps a bitter reconciliation, and instead found truth, dignity, and a second mission that transcended family grudges. The Guardian Initiative had become more than an organization. It was a testament to respect earned through authenticity. Recruiters' calls still came, and offers landed in my inbox, but I declined most of them. My commitment lay here, in building something enduring for those who stood guard in silence. In the months that followed, we expanded to 2 more cities, partnered with federal agencies to offer mental health support, and even received a government grant recognizing our impact on reducing veteran unemployment. The documentary premiered at a film festival, drawing tears and standing ovations, and Andrea Miles dedicated the closing credits to those who guard our gates, seen and unseen. One evening, as I prepared to close the office for the day, I found my mother cleaning out an old filing cabinet. handing me a box of letters and photographs. Inside were reminders of the past, my childhood trophies, our family photo albums, invitations I never opened. She met my eyes and said, "I kept these for you." I felt the full circle of our journey, from erasure to acknowledgement, from silent absence to hands-on support. "Thank you," I said quietly, and hugged her. She rested her head on my shoulder for a moment, and I realized that respect didn't need to shout. It simply needed to stand firm, to act with purpose, and to honor truth over silence. And when it did, people listened. In that quiet embrace, I saw not just the mother who had once tried to protect me by forgetting me, but a partner and a legacy neither of us could rewrite alone, one written in actions, integrity, and unyielding respect that would resonate far beyond any ceremony or viral clip.